This is Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston, bringing you stories of capitalism. President Trump has a dream of gas falling below $2. Given recent developments in the Middle East, that goal seems to be getting harder to achieve than ever. Last week, we brought you the story of what it would take. This week, we turn to what it would mean for places like Odessa, Texas, if we could. Plus, the golden era of healthcare innovation. We go to Springhouse, New Jersey to see where some of those wonder drugs we hear about are coming from, and why the CEO of Johnson & Johnson says the best is yet to come. And the future may be closer than we think when it comes to flying cars. We go inside the world of electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. But we start with the big story of the week: continued strife in the Middle East and what it means for the economy overall. Richard Haass of Centerview Partners takes us through it.
We shouldn't assume that what's happened is all that's going to happen. I don't know if it's the first inning of a 9-inning game or the 5th inning, but it's not the end of it.
Why now?
It's a good question. Bibi Netanyahu hinted or intimated that there was something new. We haven't seen it in the way of intelligence. Either the Israelis had some new intelligence about where Iran was, or maybe put together an assessment that said something. This is what I would call a preventive war. This was a war that was launched, or an attack launched by Israel, not against an imminent threat, but against a gathering threat. And what Israel, I believe, owes to its own population, to the region, to the United States and the world, is an explanation. What was it that motivated Israel to act just now? Because we don't have an answer.
There was a time not too long ago when nothing happened in that part of the world without the U.S. having some major role. Do we have a role in this? Is Israel paying attention to us? Are we encouraging them? Are we discouraging them? Where are we?
Well, we clearly didn't put up a red light. We may not even put up a yellow light. There was some back and forth between the Israelis and the Americans. These negotiations were going on. 5 rounds had taken place. The 6th round was scheduled for a few days from now. If an American president goes to an Israeli prime minister and basically says, do not do this, or it will have tremendous adverse consequences for your relationship with me, for your country's relationship with my country, in virtually any scenario short of an existential threat to the Jewish state, the Israelis would hold back. Clearly, Donald Trump did not do that to Bibi Netanyahu. But there may have been a little bit more coordination diplomatically between the United States and Israel than we understand.
What restraints or constraints do we think might exist on Israel and on Iran, quite apart from the U.S. influence? For example, we have not seen Israel go after oil fields in Iran. We haven't seen Iran go after the Strait of Hormuz. It appears right now, for the moment, they may be a little restrained.
I would argue that most of the restraints are on the Iranian side, simply because Iran is so vulnerable. Go back to last year. In April and October of last year, Israel weakened Iranian air defenses. This is the 3rd time they've done it. Essentially, Israel's demonstrated its ability to operate over Iran with near impunity. Iran is vulnerable to Israel or the United States, conceivably even to some of its neighbors. One of the things I'm going to watch closely, because I think it's related to the Israeli attack, this was not just an Israeli attack against nuclear installations. It wasn't just an Israeli attack against bases, military bases. Clearly, this was an attack aimed at disrupting, weakening, conceivably pushing out the Iranian leadership. I think that's a tall order. But I would think that one of the things all observers want to watch is what the Iranians do. And their priority, I would think, will not be tactically to respond against Israel unless they believe that's necessary to hold on to power.
What do you expect the Israeli goal is here? What is their mission? We knew when they went into Gaza, they said they wanted to defeat, if not destroy, Hamas entirely. We've talked in the past about really destroying the nuclear facilities in Iran. That's a tall order. Is that their goal? Is that achievable?
Probably several goals. One is to, again, show Iran as being so weak that directly and indirectly through its proxies, it's got to be extraordinarily careful. And the Israelis have simply reinforced that message, which they've done several times. Secondly, yes, to weaken the nuclear establishment. There's the one big site, as best I know, David, they haven't gone after yet, which is Fordo, which is one of the major enrichment sites. It's also the one that's hardest to destroy. It's most underground. So the Israelis, what word do you want to use? Reduced, degraded the Iranian nuclear establishment, killed some of its leading officials, but there's still an Iranian nuclear establishment with various installations, known and unknown.
Iran has said that if there are attacks against it, it will sprint to actually develop nuclear weapons. Is that a realistic threat? And what does this do to that? Is there a danger here that they will actually do that and get nuclear weapons faster than they would have gotten?
Not faster, but in a way that's more difficult to do this again. I would think the Iranians can't sprint easily to nuclear weapons. They've got to reestablish their leadership, but they would have to do it in ways that future Israeli strikes couldn't get out. Deep, deep, deep underground. So my guess is that won't be, if you will, a near-term response, but could that be a medium and long-term response? Absolutely. I could also imagine the Iranians saying we're not going to cooperate with international authorities like we have. Where was the world coming to our defense? We were still talking to the IAEA. Israel acted against us. There will be people, I bet, in Tehran saying, if we had had nuclear weapons, this never would have happened. It's the fact that we don't have nuclear weapons that the Israelis can act this way against us. So I would think that's going to become an intense debate in Iran.
This is, of course, first and foremost, a geopolitical issue. There are armaments being deployed. There may well be lives lost. We've already seen some in the leadership of Iran. It also has potential economic ramifications in the United States and around the world. I wonder if you could talk about specifically one question, which is inflation.
We'll get new numbers soon. It won't affect those. Over time, yes, if oil prices were to stay considerably higher. But let's take a step back. Oil prices have gone up however many dollars, and we'll see where they settle out by next week. Still, by historical terms, oil prices are relatively modest. Once you factor in inflation, if you remember where we've been at various times, so just say we're in the low 70s. That's not that high. Out of all the things that are going to cause inflation, this would, I think, simply be one of them. But it could now, if oil prices went up to 90, 100, 110, and stayed there, big thing, and stayed there. But that would require probably there to be an open-ended series of exchanges, not just between Israel and Iran, but Iran would have to decide that war widening made sense for it as strategy. And by that I mean going after Saudi Aramco, having the Houthis do more things to interrupt and so forth. Possible, won't rule it out, and if that were to happen, it could have an inflationary impact. But quite honestly, David, stuff that we're likely to do to ourselves in terms of our own policy is going to have much more inflationary impact than I think this crisis will.
Exactly my question. We've had some economic policy uncertainty in the United States since Donald Trump resumed office. Yes. And there are a lot of ramifications potentially for the economy in that. How, if at all, does this conflict in the Middle East play against the tariff threat?
If you ask me, the bigger issues are still made in America. I think the bigger sources of uncertainty, tariff policy is enormous. Questions about domestic, political, whatever you want to call it, instability, rule of law, and so forth in this country. Renewed inflation from various sources and so forth. I would think those raise bigger questions right now. If you're worried about China and the U.S., it might be export controls. And what is the nature of those mutual regimes like? But I think this adds to it. Anytime bad things happen, unexpected things happen, this is relatively unexpected until the last few days, it just adds to people's uncertainty, and it adds to their sense, maybe we ought to keep our wallets in our pocket. A
lot of uncertainty, geopolitical uncertainty, is leading to more defense spending in the United States, as proposed by Republicans on the Hill, sure, and in Europe, is what we're seeing right now. Will this be material with respect to that, or was that horse already out of the barn?
I think that horse is already out of the barn. In Europe, what's motivating it is uncertainty over the wisdom of continued reliance on the United States and the fact that the Europeans begin from such a relatively low base. Speaking about which, so do we. If you look at the percentage of GDP that the United States spends on defense compared to the Cold War, we're not even half the average levels we were at during the Cold War. And we now face uncertainty in 3 geographies, at least: Asia Pacific, Europe, and the Middle East. This is a time that's extraordinarily stressful for American defense strategy, for American force structure, which, by the way, seems very outdated. We've got a small number of very expensive platforms, which could be overwhelmed, I would think, by these very inexpensive systems like drones or anti-ship weapons, anti-air missiles, and the like. So yeah, American defense spending is seriously below what it needs to be. Though if I were going to filibuster and make one more point, David, what's always more important than how much you spend is how you spend it. And the problem with the American defense spending is not simply the level, but it's the content of it. We have to borrow from Eisenhower, we have a military-industrial legislative complex. We've now got 3 forces that are making it hard to come up with a rational, optimal defense posture. That's our biggest problem.
Final point, and it's not filibustering at all, because you wrote a book, most recently Bill of Obligations, but before that, you wrote a book about the connection between the economic strength of the United States and national security.
Well, foreign policy begins at home.
Exactly right. As we are looking at the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, what do you make of our economic posture and what it means for our national security?
Well, there's questions of the bill, also questions of the debt ceiling, the tariffs. What they've all added up to, David, is they've raised questions about America's stewardship. The rest of the world, like it or not, depends on the United States. We're still a quarter of the world's economy. The dollar has a pivotal role. I think the fact that this is one of the first times we've seen the United States in a crisis, whether we generate it or not, no longer be the safe haven, but we're beginning to see other places emerge as alternatives to the United States. That tells you all you need to know. Other leaders, other central bankers around the world can no longer operate with a confident set of assumptions and predictions about the United States. And that in and of itself drives them, quite honestly, to hedge their bets on the United States.
Coming up, President Trump's goal of $2 a gallon gasoline seems to be farther away than ever. But what would it mean for the good people of West Texas if he could get there? That's next on Wall Street Week. This is the second chapter in our story about setting goals. Last week, our colleague Alex Steele took a look at how realistic President Trump's goal of $2 gasoline is, something Israel's attack on Iran makes less likely than ever. This week, Michael McKee continues the story, traveling to Odessa, Texas, to look at what achieving the goal could mean for an important part of the U.S. economy.
Today, I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill.
The logic of drill, baby, drill seems to be drive down the price of oil, which then pushes down the price of gasoline. Lower gas prices mean happier consumers have more money to spend on other things. But that's not actually happening. The president's contention that you can buy gas for $1.98 in some places is pure fantasy. Last week, Alex Steele told us the story through the eyes of producers who can't make the math work.
I wish I had more control over margins. I really don't. It's based on supply and demand. And if margins are good, we really want to run. If margins are bad, we still need to run.
The problem is from 2027 onwards, if you look at our refining kind of global landscape, it only gets worse. We've got more closures coming because refining is such a slow-moving industry, right? 7 years it kind of takes to build one, and there are no new builds in the West anyways.
U.S. oil production is one factor affecting prices at the pump. Another, beyond the control of American policies and production, is geopolitics. We went to Midland, Odessa, in the heart of the Permian Basin to see firsthand what happens when oil prices fall.
It never was going to be. It was a nice slogan, and people like to talk about the price of oil getting so low that you have $1.50 gasoline or whatever. As a practical matter, why would some of the largest and most sophisticated companies in the world drill themselves into bankruptcy? I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Ray Perryman is an economist who has seen enough cycles in the oil market to know when the economy is in trouble.
If you go back and look kind of at the century that we've had oil and gas production here, from 1921 up to about 1974, it's pretty steadily increased. I mean, down in the Great Depression, up in the war, but pretty steadily increased and got to about 2.1 million barrels a day. And then because the fields were old, the production started declining, and it declined dramatically. It declined all the way from 1974 to 2008 every year. Went from 2.1 million barrels a day to 700,000, and people had written this place off. I mean, the pipelines that used to take oil to the Gulf were now taking gasoline here. I mean, they'd reversed the pipelines. I mean, everyone, they were calling the old rigs the tombstones and things like that.
This time around, it's a combination of President Trump's calls for more drilling, tariffs, and an increasing foreign supply of oil depressing prices and the region in the U.S. that produces it.
It's definitely cyclical, not nearly as much as it was because, again, the cycles are not as pronounced as they used to be, primarily because there's plentiful oil in the world. I mean, at one point in time, there were either critical shortages or big surpluses all the time. That seems to be leveled out more to some extent now. But obviously, if other producers decide to increase production, or if something causes the world uncertainty to happen in the world and demand to drop off, those kinds of things, we're going through some of that right now, then you do see the industry being somewhat cyclical. But now it's a matter of more plus or minus 5% in oil field employment, that sort of thing. Not how it used to be, where it was just literally all in or all out.
It happened during the oil glut of the 1980s, which led to a collapse in prices, and again in 2014, when Brent crude fell from around $112 a barrel in June 2014 to a low of $31 in January 2016.
There's no question about it. Again, it's not like the 80s where things become, basically during that period of time became almost ghost towns out here. I mean, one statistic I was often fond of was for a 13-year period during that oil bust, there were 2 multifamily housing permits in Midland, Texas. And I don't mean 2 apartment complexes, I mean 1 duplex. Okay, I mean literally two multifamily houses. We're now seeing a steady stream of new housing coming online, even in the midst of some of these things that are happening. And certainly it slows down. It slows down significantly. But we're no longer in that cycle where the place kind of dries up and blows away.
Both times when oil prices crashed, oil companies shut down drilling and reduced production. The ripple effect of that pullback reduced GDP growth to less than 1% in the fourth quarter of the year. In 2014-15, we had what economists call a silent recession in the U.S. We didn't see growth contract for the whole country, but in this area and other manufacturing areas, there was a big downturn. What was it like here?
It was bad. People have adapted. I think the frenzy that went on after coming into 14 were especially the oil companies, the big independents that were drilling just to drill as much as they could, just to get as much oil as they could. They learned a lesson in that time. They stopped drilling and started drilling out of cash flow. So people nowadays don't get overextended like the banks are smarter. They don't allow people to get overextended like they used to in the past too. And so it's made for an interesting paradigm right now. The service companies are healthy to get through another year of this, but they can't with their employees. So they'll have to lay them off. And that's what's sad, is you're losing incredible brain trust in these people.
There's a danger that's happening again. With prices below the cost of exploring and developing new wells, oil companies are in the process of shutting down again.
The travel's getting cheaper. Again, it is a great tax break for the country. There's no doubt about it. I think that's why Trump was wanting lower prices to spur on things like that in the country as a whole. But it's very detrimental to our industry here in the United States. And you can't have more of an American industry than the Texas oil and gas industry, and employs people here.
Kirk Edwards runs Latigo Petroleum, an independent exploration and production company in the Permian Basin. Last week, he canceled a contract to drill 5 more wells. He won't start up again until oil is at least $70. And on top of falling prices, he also has to deal with the Trump import taxes.
So the tariffs have hurt us also because of steel prices. So you've got the price of steel, which was a very big component of our wells, going up 20%, which makes our wells more expensive than we have had them in the past, and yet our oil price is down 22%.
Over the past 4 months, West Texas Intermediate, the benchmark American oil price, fell by about $10 a barrel. Israel's attack on Iran has pushed WTI off its lows, climbing above $70 a barrel. Analysts warn it could go higher, but it will take some time to show up in gasoline prices. Most people in America think of gasoline when they think of inflation and they think of oil prices. Oil prices have come down a lot, but gasoline prices haven't come down as much. Has the relationship between oil and gas prices changed some?
No. And so when Trump talks about $2 gasoline, literally it's $2 coming out of the refinery. And so today it's probably $2.05, $2.10, something like that. But from there it gets marked up by the people that buy it at the refinery, bring it to the gas stations, and they do their deal about making profits. So we've always seen when oil prices go down, the gasoline prices are slow to react. But they should be coming down. And, most towns have a Sam's, probably the cheapest gasoline, and it's at $2.40 right now here in Odessa. But you'll see most of the service stations are at $2.60. California, you're still going to see $4 and $5 gasoline.
Yet as of June 9th, the national average price per gallon is 6 cents higher than at the first of the year. While down from its early April peak, we're still not back to pre-tariff levels. And it's not clear when or if we will be. An expected tailwind for the economy may turn out to be just a slight breeze.
It's the rest of the country that benefits from the gasoline price. Again, people in Midland, Odessa, we would rather see higher gasoline prices because it means the oil price is good and the economy is going to be good. But it is a side effect for everybody because everybody has to use gasoline in their cars right now to go to work and fly and do things like that.
Odessa, Texas provides an early warning. The White House drill baby drill promise is seen here as a threat. Odessa and its neighboring town of Midland are the beating heart of the oil shale revolution that helped the U.S. regain energy dominance. But rigs are coming down and jobs are going away. Chevron this month announced it would lay off 800 workers in the Odessa-Midland area.
You can tell we're down probably 3,300 people without jobs right now. But the huge part of that is each one of these wells cost about $12 million, give or take, to drill. And you put 30 rigs times $12 billion, it's about $400 million a month that was coming into this economy and paying for people and buying equipment and things like that. It's over $4 billion a year that's being taken out of our market here just in the Permian alone. And so it's significant.
Well, what's the economic impact on Odessa?
Well, we're diversified. So we've learned after those 6 times, Odessa and Midland have learned to diversify. We've got a University of Texas system branch here, University of Texas Permian Basin, that's growing. And so it's just like Texas Tech in Lubbock or Baylor and Waco. We're seeing that these colleges make a difference in good times and bad. And also we've recruited in different companies to come in here. A lot of power is getting generated here because the natural gas price is so cheap in the Permian. And we're also seeing an uptick right now in data centers. So these data centers want to come locate where the energy is cheap. And so we're seeing some of that. So some of that is offsetting the shock that we get normally from the oil times because we've done a good job at helping to diversify the economy. But still, the oil sector is what pays all the bills around town. And people are more affected by that, for sure.
The bet is less drilling, less oil will push prices up, the opposite of the president's goal. And at this point, it's too early to say whether higher oil prices will lead to more drilling. Oil companies don't know how long prices will remain elevated. In the meantime, for a town where almost everyone drives a gas-hungry pickup truck, a fall in oil prices means cheaper gasoline, which doesn't do you much good if you've lost your job.
We've turned drill baby drill now into wait baby wait. It's something that, again, we're pausing. And again, we know the effect of lower oil prices. It will slow down things in this country. We've seen it 6 times now. And I don't understand the side effect because you're in a county voted 80% for Donald Trump.
If you see the global economy relax a little bit, right now there's a lot of uncertainty. The most typical economic reaction to uncertainty is to do nothing. Don't buy that car, don't buy that house, don't bring out that new product, don't make that investment. All of those things, we tend to just lay back and do nothing.
One way Ray Perryman takes the pulse of oil production in the Permian Basin is to look at oil rigs that are in storage. We drove past one by the railroad station in Odessa, and if it's any indication of the slow progress on drill baby drill, there were 8 rigs in storage doing the wait baby wait.
Coming up, every day we hear about a new wonder drug to help us live longer or improve our lives. But where do they all come from? And can we keep up the pace of innovation? That's next on Wall Street Week. This is a story about origins, the origins of all those new medicines we hear about every day, whether to deal with diabetes.
I have type 2 diabetes, but I manage it well.
Or with cancer.
This time, we're taking the battle to cancer.
Did you ever wonder where they all come from? We went to one of the sources outside Trenton, New Jersey.
The center of the action of our research and development organization, which is the lifeblood of a company like Johnson & Johnson. So here we have about 2,500 scientists and researchers that are connected with the rest of our R&D organization.
Joaquin Duato is chairman and CEO of Johnson & Johnson, one of the largest drug makers in the world. We met with him at his firm's research center in Springhouse, New Jersey, to learn how a major pharmaceutical company develops cutting-edge drugs.
It started with a smaller campus, and gradually we have expanded it, as you can see, into a large campus in a very beautiful location too.
For Duato, there has never been a better time to be in the business of health science innovation.
We are in a golden era of life science innovation, of medical innovation. And that's the convergence of two forces. On one side, we have a better understanding of the biology of diseases, of the underpinnings of disease. And on the other hand, we have technology, AI, machine learning, that gives us the opportunity to manage large amounts of data and gain insights for that. So all these factors combined create the type of progress that we see. And the US is the country that today has a lead over the rest of the world in life science innovation.
It is no coincidence that the U.S. leads the world in biotech innovation. In 2021, a Congressional Budget Office study reported that the industry was investing over $80 billion a year, up by a factor of 10 over 10 years, amounting to some 25% of pharma companies' revenues, a much larger portion than for other industries. It's not just the money being spent in the United States. It's also the way the government, academia, and the private sector have worked together.
You don't have places which are hubs of life science innovation like Boston or San Francisco anywhere else in the world. Everybody is looking with envy to the type of ecosystem that we have in the US. Great invested in basic research through academic institutions and hospitals, venture capital that flows into the life science sector, great companies that are able to develop those technologies, manufacture them and bring them to patients, protection of intellectual property, a market that rewards innovation. That combination, it's a uniquely American combination.
Individual companies like J&J have also created their own complex structures to seek out innovation wherever it is and develop it.
We work very hard in order to work and scout the world to see when and where are innovations and technologies that are promising that could eventually benefit of our scale in research, in development, in manufacturing, and in commercialization. And that's how we have been able to find significant innovations that were at an emerging state, still far from getting into patients, and ultimately get them into patients.
An example is icotrokinra, an oral medicine Johnson & Johnson is developing to treat the skin disease plaque psoriasis.
So what are autoimmune diseases? Diseases in which your own immune system turns against you. Having an oral therapy was going to expand the pool of patients that were going to be able to treat it with this medication. So we work and we scout the world to see, are there any company out there that is going to have an oral medication with comparable safety and efficacy to these injectable biologics? And we identified one company. And they had a molecule that still was preclinical, meaning it had not been yet used in patients. So we brought it here to Springhouse. And in Springhouse, we work in making sure that the drug was stable in the digestive tract, that it had the right potency, and we actually built a medicine that is an oral medicine with similar efficacy to biologics that went to the clinic. We had the clinical trials, very successful, showing this comparable efficacy, and pretty soon, in the second half of the year, we're going to be able to file it for the FDA in psoriasis and get to patients next year.
How big could this be?
This is going to be one of our biggest breakthroughs for Johnson & Johnson and for our growth in the second half of the decade.
Big pharmaceutical companies like Johnson & Johnson are spending record amounts of money to discover and develop new medicines. It has invested some $50 billion in R&D and M&A since the beginning of last year. But they're far from the only ones. Zara Moradali represents venture capital firms in biotech as head of Grant Thornton's life sciences industry practice.
So when you think about big pharma and you look at data from 2015 through 2021, the drugs that were developed internally and FDA approved was less than 30% by big pharma, and the rest of it was external. For some companies, that percentage was 80%. And for others, it was zero.
In looking for those opportunities to invest in the innovative culture found in the labs, Moradali looks for three things: the people, the science, and patience.
when you think about science, it's challenging. It's hard, and you know, when you think about the failures in R&D, I mean, that's to be expected. And any investor should be patient, and they should have a time horizon of like 10 to 15 years to see a drug from discovery to commercialization. It's not easy. Science is difficult.
Duato respects how difficult the discipline is, regardless of size or scale. And of course, we can't talk about innovation in just about any part of the economy without turning to artificial intelligence and what it will mean for scientific discovery. We saw it firsthand at J&J as they used it to screen millions of compounds.
How long does it take you to screen the whole 1.7 million?
We can screen one compound every 2 to 3 seconds. So we can screen this whole entire 1.7 million compounds in roughly 5 to 10 days, depending on the target.
Wow.
So
you can screen 1.7 million compounds in 5 to 10 days. Does this go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week?
Yes, it can. Yeah.
So what used to take us months now take us days, no?
Yes.
So this is a way of accelerating the number of compounds and also the time it takes us to have lead compounds. And then we have other platforms that assess to what extent they are going to be viable. Are they going to have any toxicities? What is the biological effect?
But what form does the output of this have? I mean, is it data? Is it?
It's the data.
It's the data. So in the past, analyzing all these millions of data points would have been very difficult for researchers. Now they have the underlying models that are going to drive the insights for them. So we accelerate the screening and also the analytical part. So the AI is a tool.
Yeah.
The data is proprietary, and then also the interpretation of the insights coming from the AI is what our scientists and researchers do. So while, yes, technology is important, ultimately it comes down to our data and to our researchers to what extent we can accelerate progress.
Handling all the data is a big opportunity, but also a big challenge, particularly for early-stage biotech firms, leading some to partner up.
Does that, all things being equal over time, give Big Pharma something of an edge because it typically has access to more data?
I mean, it might be, and that is where we're seeing collaboration agreements with companies that are AI-first companies with Big Pharma, and you're seeing activities in that space as well. You've got this right. I mean, that's where the flow of money in the future will be.
And then there's the role of the government in giving incentives for biotech innovation and in creating the overall environment where it can thrive. Tim Sullivan is CEO of the New Jersey Economic Development Authority.
It's a crowded field, but New Jersey, I think, stands toward the top of that field, largely because of the investments that Governor Murphy has made in growing that innovation ecosystem. So we have an R&D tax credit, for example, that all the big pharma companies take advantage of. We have really focused on trying to grow, again, that early stage pipeline of companies that might get acquired by big pharma or turn into big pharma companies themselves. So, for example, Gilead made New Jersey its East Coast headquarters 3 or 4 years ago because they bought a company in Morris County and liked the talent so much that in New Jersey that they decided to plant their East Coast flag here. So, for example, we have a program. We think it's the only program like this in the country that lets early stage life sciences and technology companies sell or monetize their net operating losses and sell them to profitable companies in exchange for non-dilutive, essentially equity, which a number of companies that have grown and scaled have taken advantage of.
This may be the golden era of medical innovation, as Joaquin Duato believes. But when you ask about the origin of all those wonder drugs, there's no single answer. They come from a unique combination of private enterprise, big and small, capital from a range of sources, the research being pursued by gifted scientists, and the support of federal and state governments. But the results of that network have only one real destination for all their work: the patients they serve.
One thing that I want to leave the group here is all about the patient. Science is hard, have the patience, and let's support the community and innovation to get it to where we need it to be.
We measure success in terms of how many patients we can serve. If we are able to address significant patient needs, as we are doing, then we can certainly translate that into an economic return. This is part of the principles of our credo. We are a company with 140 years of history. Our founders established what we call our credo 85 years ago. creating a very clear hierarchy of decision making. First, we serve the patients, then the employees, then the communities, and if we do well for those stakeholders, then you're going to have a fair return for your shareholders.
Coming up, tired of all those traffic jams? A rapidly developing industry of electric vehicles aims to take to the air to reinvent the world of transportation. This is a story where the sky is not the limit, it's the goal. Automobiles have come a long way since Henry Ford introduced the world to the Model T in 1908. And several companies are now even trying to get them off the ground. But will flying cars change our world the way the first car did? Ed Ludlow brings us that story from San Francisco.
Flying cars have been imagined time and time again, but they've taken a while to come to fruition. Now, as President Trump signs his executive order on accelerating flying car programs, are they finally a reality? Morgan Stanley estimates the eVTOL industry could be a $9 trillion market by 2050.
eVTOLs are, by definition, electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, which is a whole new breed of flying vehicles that effectively give us flying cars as we were promised as little kids, but using completely new forms of propulsion and flight configurations that are very new for the industry. This is supposed to be, by virtue of many analysts, a significant new market that hasn't really existed before. Over the next 5, 10, 20 years, it's going to change very dramatically as we start to unlock some of the biggest barriers for taking advantage of the sky in ways that we haven't done before. In the United States, there's somewhere on the order of about 50 companies that are developing some sort of flying car. Companies that people are starting to see almost daily, from Joby Technologies to Beta Technologies to Pivotal to Archer.
When I started on this more than 15 years ago, it was a fringe idea. And today there is an incredible, vibrant industry that is building up.
Joe Ben Bevirt is the founder and CEO of Joby. The company focuses on air taxi services. It has a market cap of nearly $6.7 billion, which is almost 15% of the market cap of General Motors.
With a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, you can move from point A to point B, and you can build networks of air traffic routes in and around cities. And we're working at building best-in-class vertiport infrastructure at JFK and at LaGuardia so that you can go seamlessly from a Joby flight onto your Delta flight. The goal is to do this in a very stepwise, progressive way. One day we hope that there will be a takeoff and landing location as conveniently located as a subway stop in a major city.
Joby's version of a flying car is technically considered an aircraft. That's where the regulation of the technology gets tricky.
The big moment that Wall Street in particular is waiting for is FAA certification. What is it that the FAA needs to sign off on, and when does that happen to your mind?
We're the first company to achieve the Stage 1 certification, the first company to achieve Stage 2 of the certification, first company to complete Stage 3, and now we're making phenomenal progress through Stage 4. And when we submit the test plans, and then that opens the door for us to begin the testing. And then Stage 5 is when we submit the test reports, and then the FAA signs off.
It's a small market, but there are many players. Each has different tech and progress varies. S&P Global says Joby is expected to go from 6 to 56 units by 2030, generating $3.5 billion in revenue. But that's all contingent on FAA certification. The company's testing with no one in the cockpit, but the world's watching closely.
Overall, the battery capacity for this aircraft is something like 1.5 Model X Teslas, just to kind of put it in a ground vehicle reference. The idea is to sell this by the seat. So when you open the app, you'll be able to select the ride. A car will come and get you to wherever you are, take you to the nearest takeoff and landing spot. And then other people will be kind of brought just in time at the same time to fill the other seats within the aircraft. One of the things we I probably haven't focused on enough is the incredible acoustic signature. There are a significant challenge for people who live close to the takeoff and landing locations. I've told the team, let's try to make this like the wind in the trees. When you hear it fly over you, everybody has to stop and be really quiet, because then you hear this, and that's magic.
Joby expects to see their first passenger operations in early 2026 in Dubai, operating full steam ahead on production in their California-based manufacturing facility using locals to craft their creations.
One of the cool things is about another element of the Flyboy that's incredible is how easy it makes it to fly. So you can take somebody who's never flown an airplane before, never flown a helicopter before, you put them in the simulator, and they'll fly you perfectly from Wall Street to the Delta Terminal 4 at JFK. And that is really spectacular in terms of how intuitive it is.
But can anyone really fly one of these crafts?
Go for takeoff.
One of the other players in the space is a company called Pivotal. Pivotal's eVTOL is taking a very different approach.
Pivotal has been in the development of novel architecture aircraft now for 13 years. Our mission is nothing short of just changing the way humanity moves through the air. And that's going to happen in small steps.
Ken Karklin is the CEO of Pivotal, an eVTOL company with a unique design and a very different mission.
Near term, we want to deliver on this promise of personal aviation and be able to deliver to individual private owners who can take to the sky and enjoy the freedom of personal flight on their own terms.
So Pivotal has 3 streams of customers. One are direct consumers in the personal aerial vehicle market. The second pillar of our strategy is to the defense unit. And then the third is actually for public service.
There's hundreds of thousands of 911 calls in the United States alone every single year. Many of those, something on the order of 1 in 10, are time-sensitive medical calls. We're having a qualified emergency medical technician or paramedic there on site in 4 minutes versus 9 minutes or 12 minutes or even 15 minutes could make the difference between life and death. We actually hope to be in a pilot operations in at least 2 locations in the United States, really in the next 6 months. So before year's end, we hope to be up and saving lives and training other paramedics to actually be pilots of this aircraft.
It's considered an aircraft, but its operators are not FAA-certified pilots. Pivotal claims it's still safer than driving.
It's actually like 3 or 4 orders of magnitude safer than driving your car on the freeway. On a per mile basis, might even be better than that. It's very close to zero risk. That may contribute to a culture of zero risk within FAA, and that would certainly slow down innovation, because there always has to be at least the tiniest acceptance of risk for everybody involved in delivering a new technology that involves transportation.
So the flight program is designed at Pivotal. It is not FAA certified, so you are not an FAA pilot, but we require everyone to be certified by Pivotal to be able to fly the aircraft. And that goes in 3 stages. There's an at-home study to be able to understand airspace and atmosphere so that you can integrate into the airspace around you. Then there's simulator training where you're in a full flight simulator, which is able to go through all the standard flight dynamics as well as emergency procedures. And that usually just takes a couple of days. And then after that, you do flight training with us. You hop in the real aircraft and you take to the skies. The trainer on the ground who's communicating to you. And it typically is about 8 flights to be able to get through all the different areas of flight within our flight training program.
We did not set out to immediately change the world on a tight schedule by somehow filling the sky with air taxis. Now, don't get me wrong, I can't wait until I've been down in San Francisco and I'm ready to go home and I can pull out my smartphone app and get a $50 ride home to San Jose. And raising capital based upon that premise is also, it's a challenge because a lot of things have to go right for that to happen on a certain schedule. So we decided fundamentally we're going to stay away from air taxi and focus on privately owned assets, assets for public safety, and assets for defense.
According to reports, the company's backed by Larry Page. Pivotal did not comment on its investors to Bloomberg. Both privately held Pivotal and publicly held Joby have taken over 10 years to launch, Joby raising over $2.6 billion. Progress has been slow.
I'd say that it's taking a lot of time in the West, primarily because of the regulatory pathway. It is very, very difficult to certify something through the FAA, be it a small little single-engine Cessna up to something that's completely novel and new, like a flying car. And we're having to create the regulations real time as we're developing the technologies. The good analogy is you're putting the engine on the airplane while you're flying at the same time. Now, I will say there's a lot of interest and support from the current administration to accelerate these technologies and to reduce the barriers for companies to be able to test, validate, and take these products into commercial operation, but it still takes a lot of time.
The world saw these things in TV shows and movies decades ago. And I think what you're asking is, why didn't we just make them decades ago? Well, really, we didn't have the battery technology. So to have the energy density in the batteries and also the power density to be able to take off and sustain flight wasn't in previous battery technologies. And even today, we're operating at just the limits of the battery technology today to be able to have 20 minutes flying miles.
Scalability is the big question for this technology. When automobiles were first introduced, it took 5 more years to bring costs down by 50% with the introduction of the assembly line. Cost efficiencies are still many years away for eVTOL.
There's a few things that have to happen for scale to happen. Ground infrastructure is a key area, much like Tesla with their superchargers. The regulatory environment, getting those put in place, and then actually demonstrating to customers that this is cheaper and safer. And once you are able to do that with real paying people flying on these things, I expect the scale to only be limited about how quickly you can build them.
We only want to use our architecture to go after applications we know we can do better than anyone else can. So that does not include flying really fast. You know, efficiency is the name of our game. Cost effectiveness is the name of our game. But again, we're focusing on privately owned aircraft, privately owned assets. Today, only in the ultralight single seater capability. Tomorrow, something much larger.
So the idea is that we can sell this by the seat and that we can make it more accessible and then actually drive the overall kind of like flywheel of demand and utilization and load factor for these aircraft and make a really economically viable service, not just one that's an incredibly better way to get to where you want to go.
What gets me really excited is if we can move to where automotive got to as we moved into the early 1900s, where we're starting to produce thousands and then tens of thousands of aircraft a year, and we drive the unit prices down to the point where this becomes as affordable as driving your own car, where we hope to launch at prices around where an Uber Black fare would cost you, down to the price where millions of people can afford to do this every day. That's when I feel like my dream will have been realized.
Next, the life and legacy of legendary macroeconomist Stanley Fischer. This month, the world lost a towering figure in economics. Stanley Fischer served as governor of the Bank of Israel, vice chair of the Federal Reserve, and in the leadership of both the World Bank and the IMF. But he may have been most influential as an academic at MIT, where he shaped the field of macroeconomics, and in the process taught the likes of Ben Bernanke and Mario Draghi.
Well, there's a saying that science progresses funeral by funeral. So I think I'd be teaching more or less the same things, and the next generation would have something more advanced, more different than I would have had.
Our special contributor, Larry Summers, was one of those he mentored. Larry, we lost a giant in the world of economics and the world at large in Stanley Fischer, someone you knew well, worked with through the years. Give us your thoughts about Dr. Fischer.
Stan Fischer was my teacher. He was my colleague, counterpart, and friend. He was an enormous inspiration to me, to Ben Bernanke, who led the US Fed, to Mario Draghi, who led the European Central Bank, to Kazuo Ueda, who leads the Bank of Japan. That's a trifecta that I'm not sure any professor of economics will match. And he had done all that well before he was 40. When Stan Fischer was at the IMF, he established a level of trust between a rich country policymaker, the United States, an American working at the IMF, and policymakers in developing countries, whether it was Brazil or Korea, whether it was Mexico or Argentina, whether Mexico or Indonesia, whether it was Argentina or South Africa. He established a level of trust that I don't think any developed world, rich country policymaker has had with policymakers and governments in developing countries before or since. There's a cliche phrase that people use, tough love. Stan Fischer embodied that. He told them all kinds of things that they had to do that were, in many cases, very politically painful for them, but he also did everything he could, and it was a ton, to make sure that the international community would support them. People talk about this having been an era of convergence between the developing and the developed world. Stan Fischer was as important as anyone else in that remarkable achievement.
Fischer played an important role in monetary policy in the United States at the start of the last Trump administration, when he was the vice chair of the Fed. He appeared on Bloomberg Television in October 2017 to talk about pressure to keep interest rates low.
Well, there are reasons to want low rates, especially when growth is so slow and investment has been smaller than expected for quite some time. So low rates are to encourage investment, they are to encourage growth. They have been less successful in that than we expected, but they've been very successful in encouraging employment. And the miracle of this recovery is that it did not generate, that the crisis did not generate long-term massive unemployment. We're basically back to something close to full employment. Well, we always need to be steeled for the possibility that we need to change course drastically. In October 2008, the Fed changed course drastically. That was obviously the thing to do after the financial crisis began to develop. So you have to watch and wait and hope you can stay on the smooth path, but never believe yourself that you can stay on those paths forever. You can't.
He was, if I can use the term, a practitioner at the IMF as well as at the World Bank. He also was a major academic. Give us a sense about the legacy of his academic work.
You know, in the 1970s, the Keynesian consensus crumbled. It crumbled in part because the Keynesians had said you couldn't have inflation and unemployment at the same time, and we had a ton of stagflation. And it disintegrated because there was a whole new school of rational expectations, new classical macroeconomics that used very elaborate mathematics and talked about micro foundations of macroeconomics and asserted that Keynesian economics was illogical as well as wrong in its predictions, and drew very radical conclusions that macroeconomic policy couldn't stabilize the economy. And those ideas started to hold sway for some interval. And so there was a task of reconstruction, understanding the mistakes of the past, incorporating new developments in the science that came to be called the new Keynesian macroeconomics. And Stan Fischer, with his great friend Rudy Dornbusch's textbook, was kind of the text of that scientific revolution. And it's an important legacy that is finding application in macroeconomics classes across the world, and is finding application in every major central bank, and provides the basis for the advice that the IMF and the World Bank give more than 100 countries each year. And it started with that reconstruction in which Stan Fischer was a leader.
He brought his enormous intellectual capital from his academic work to, as I say, the practice of economics, IMF, World Bank, Bank of Israel, and as vice chair of the Federal Reserve in the United States. We always say it's not as good as it used to be, but do we lack in our central banks right now some of that intellectual capital from serious scholars?
I'm probably more worried about the underlying economic problems and the external pressures being placed on central banks by, for example, the kinds of comments that our president makes very regularly, than I am by the lack of intellectual capital among their leaders. I've got very high regard for both Jay Powell and Christine Lagarde, for example. But look, you have asked me on this show about questions about artificial intelligence and how that's going to transform the economy, and it is. And it's the job of scholars not to prescribe what the Fed funds rate should be at the next meeting, but to develop the new understandings that will form the new frameworks for an economy that's going to be fundamentally new. And that's why there's always going to be a need for the next generation and the generation after that of Stan Fischers.
That does it for us here at Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston. See you next week for more stories of capitalism.